Where do Black people and Africans stand in Christianity? Well, earlier, the curse of Ham was used to justify enslaving Black people, saying that enslavement was a manifestation of the Bible's prophecy. However, this prophecy was misinterpreted, using it as a religious tool to legitimize slavery. Black people's place in Christianity was set this way. They were not at the giving end, but on the receiving end. They could not read and interpret the Bible. Rather, they were told what it says and had to comply. But what if we say that Black people are on the giving end of the Christian spectrum? What if we finally say what has been hidden until now, that Jesus himself was Black and had roots in Africa? If that's the case, it ends all the stereotypes against Black people, making a Black man, called Jesus, the founder of Christianity and the Son of God. But was Jesus really Black? And how does this matter today? Welcome to a new episode of Black Afric Diary, a channel where we talk about Black African history, culture, arts, and civilization. It's a place where you will see the real picture of Black Africa, its stories, and the events defining it. In this episode, we will tell you about the forgotten and forbidden story of Black Jesus and his African roots. Let's get started. Everything could be hidden, but not the place where Jesus was born. And this place tells quite a lot about what Jesus' ethnicity and skin complexion could be. So, where was Jesus born? Jesus was born in Bethlehem, a small town in Roman-occupied Judea, part of what we now refer to as the Middle East. This region sat at the crossroads of 3 continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe, making it a diverse cultural hub. However, you should know that people in ancient Judea weren't classified by the strict racial categories we use today. Ethnic diversity flowed naturally, and connections to African heritage were ingrained in the fabric of society. In this context, considering Jesus as having African roots isn't about forcing modern racial constructs onto him. Instead, it's about acknowledging the rich ethnic diversity of the region in which he lived. Judea's proximity to Africa, particularly to Egypt, opens the door to exploring these African connections further. And something you would have never heard before is that the people in Bethlehem were descendants of ancient Israelites, tracing their ancestry to the 12 tribes of Israel, which had been in the region for centuries. They were Semitic people with physical traits common to the Middle Eastern population of that time, such as darker skin and dark hair. Jesus rose among them, which means he shared this ethnicity. What happened next proves Jesus really had a dark complexion. When King Herod ordered the slaughter of male infants in Bethlehem, Joseph, Mary, and baby Jesus fled to Egypt to escape persecution. Egypt, a North African nation, had long served as a place of refuge for Jewish people during times of hardship, dating back to the Babylonian exile. The choice of Egypt as a sanctuary for Jesus is significant. Egypt was populated by dark-skinned people of African descent, and the fact that Jesus and his family could live there without drawing attention suggests they likely shared similar physical traits with the local population. Otherwise, they would have selected European countries for refuge. Scholars like Dr. Kane Hope Felder highlight this moment as not only connecting Jesus to Africa, but also challenging the whitewashed depictions of him that have dominated Western art and culture. Biblical scholar Father Jerome Murphy O'Connor further emphasizes the symbolism of Egypt in Jesus' life. He argues that Egypt was not just a geographic refuge, but a place of deep cultural and spiritual significance. Egypt was a center of learning and spirituality, influencing Jewish thought for centuries. It's likely that Jesus' early years in Egypt shaped his worldview in ways often overlooked by Western interpretations of the Bible. One of the strongest arguments for Jesus' African connections comes from early Christian art in Africa. In places like Egypt and Ethiopia, some of the earliest images of Jesus show him with dark skin, woolly hair, and distinctly African features. The Coptic Christians of Egypt, one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, have consistently portrayed Jesus to reflect their own ethnic identity. Coptic art from as early as the 2nd and 3rd centuries shows Jesus as a figure who resembles the people of Egypt. with darker skin and African characteristics. These images stand in contrast to the white European-looking Jesus that emerged later, particularly during the Renaissance. Renaissance art, heavily influenced by European ideals, transformed Jesus into a figure with fair skin and European features, which served the political and cultural agendas of European colonizers. In Ethiopia, where Christianity was officially adopted in the 4th century, Jesus has always been depicted with African features. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintains that Jesus had African ancestry, a belief that has shaped Ethiopian spiritual and cultural identity for centuries. Ethiopian scholars argue that these depictions are not just symbolic, but reflect a more accurate historical portrayal of Jesus, acknowledging the ethnic diversity of the ancient world. But why was Jesus whitewashed by Europeans? Well, the portrayal of Jesus as white has been more than just an artistic choice. It has served as a political tool to reinforce European dominance throughout history, especially during the colonial era. European colonizers brought with them not only military power, but also religious imagery. The depiction of a white, European-looking Jesus was used to justify colonial rule and the Christianization of non-European peoples, particularly in Africa and the Americas. This image of a white Jesus, popularized in Renaissance art, has persisted in Western culture through films, paintings, and religious teachings. Scholars like Dr. Edward J. Blum and Dr. Paul Harvey have shown how this portrayal of Jesus aligned Christianity with whiteness and was used to support racial hierarchies that dehumanized people of African descent. The white Jesus became a symbol of European moral superiority, justifying the enslavement of Africans and the exploitation of their lands. Therefore, the erasure of Jesus' African identity was no accident. It was a deliberate effort that unfolded over centuries, influenced by cultural, political, and theological forces. However, this whitewashing and use of Christianity for political means occurred hundreds of years ago before colonialism. As Christianity spread through Europe in its early years, it gradually became tied to imperial power, especially under the Roman Empire. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. One key moment was the reign of Emperor Constantine in the 4th century. When Constantine converted to Christianity and made it the official religion of the Roman Empire, a critical shift occurred. Religion and politics were merged, and the image of Jesus began to reflect the cultural and racial norms of the European ruling class. They wanted to ensure the Son of God looked like the elite class, and for this purpose, Jesus had to be whitewashed. So, they did it. At the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, where major Christian doctrines were established, the groundwork was laid for reshaping Jesus' image. Greco-Roman ideals of beauty dominated, and Jesus was soon depicted with fair skin, straight hair, and European features. It served a clear purpose: to reinforce the political power of European rulers. A white, European-looking Jesus was a perfect fit for the Roman Empire's aim to legitimize its rule through Christianity. This white depiction of Jesus solidified further during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. European artists, driven by ideals of European beauty, continued to portray Jesus with distinctly European features. Dr. Edward J. Blum and Dr. Paul Harvey, in their book The Color of Christ, explain how European rulers used this portrayal of Jesus to support their political and spiritual dominance. They argue that art and religion were tools used to reinforce racial hierarchies, especially as European nations began their colonial expansion. By the time of the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, the image of a white Jesus was so ingrained in Christian thought that it was rarely questioned. While the Reformation brought significant changes to Christian practice and theology, it did little to challenge the racialized image of Jesus. The continued portrayal of Jesus as white reinforced the idea that whiteness was linked to divinity, which helped justify the institutions of slavery, colonialism, and later racial segregation. For centuries, the image of a white Jesus symbolized power and superiority. It upheld systems of oppression that dehumanized African, indigenous, and other non-European peoples. Religious leaders and political rulers worked together to maintain racial hierarchies, using the image of a white Jesus to uphold social control and legitimize exploitation. But how did whitewashing Jesus impact colored people? Well, by portraying Jesus as a white European figure, Christianity reinforced the belief that whiteness was linked to divinity, purity, and moral superiority. This not only marginalized non-white people, but also justified the enslavement of Africans, the genocide of indigenous peoples, and the colonization of large parts of the world. All this was said to be the manifestation of Christianity. Theologians, artists, and political leaders didn't just distort Jesus' image, they shaped how race and identity were understood within Christian theology. This association between whiteness and divinity provided religious justification for racial inequality and helped entrench the dehumanization of non-white communities. The legacy of this distortion can still be felt today in the racial divides that persist in both society and the church. For African and African-descended Christians, reclaiming the image of Black Jesus is an empowering act that reconnects them with a version of Jesus that reflects their own racial and cultural identity, honoring their heritage. Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, a prominent theologian, has emphasized the importance of reclaiming Jesus' African identity. She argues that portraying Jesus as Black directly challenges the racist ideologies that have historically used religion to oppress non-white people. The deliberate erasure of Black Jesus has had devastating consequences for how race, power, and divinity have been understood throughout history. By restoring Jesus' African identity, we can challenge the narrative that has justified centuries of oppression and open the door to a more inclusive and authentic understanding of faith. For many African Americans, the image of a white Jesus has been a source of pain and alienation. During slavery, millions of Africans were forcibly converted to Christianity, not for their spiritual well-being, but as a tool of control. White Jesus was presented as the embodiment of their oppressors, reinforcing the idea that whiteness was connected to godliness, authority, and superiority. Enslaved Africans were expected to worship a deity that resembled their enslavers, creating a deep contradiction between the liberating message of the Gospels and the figure of white supremacy they were forced to revere. Even after slavery was abolished, the image of white Jesus persisted in Black churches, influencing how African Americans related to their faith. This portrayal disconnected them from the teachings of Jesus, which emphasized liberation and justice for the oppressed, as it clashed with the whitewashed figure that had been used to justify their oppression. This disconnect sparked a growing desire to reclaim Jesus in a way that truly reflected the lived experiences and identity of African Americans. The image of Black Jesus goes beyond religion. It serves as a critique of systemic racism and white supremacy within both religious and secular institutions. By reclaiming Jesus as a man of African descent, theologians and activists challenge the long-standing association between Christianity and whiteness that has dominated Western religious thought for centuries. Black Jesus, in this sense, becomes a radical symbol of justice and equality, reminding us that God's love and liberation extend to all, regardless of race or ethnicity. For those dedicated to racial justice, Black Jesus offers a hopeful vision of a world where all people are seen as equal in the eyes of God. He calls believers to a deeper understanding of the gospel, one that emphasizes solidarity with the marginalized and oppressed. In this vision, Black Jesus is not only a historical figure, but a living symbol of God's commitment to justice, liberation, and human dignity. Reclaiming Black Jesus also impacts the broader discussion of race and identity within the church. African American and multiracial congregations are rethinking traditional depictions of Jesus, recognizing that these portrayals are not neutral, but reflect centuries of racial bias. Embracing Black Jesus allows these communities to affirm their own identities, while challenging the narratives that have excluded them for so long. But what will happen when a Black Jesus is accepted? For Black people, it will bring salvation. One of the most powerful effects of reclaiming Black Jesus is the spiritual connection it enables between Black people and their faith. Historically, Black Christians were often taught to worship a white Jesus, whose image mirrored the enslavers and colonizers who oppressed them. This created a deep dissonance. How could a figure representing love, justice, and liberation resemble those who inflicted pain and suffering? By embracing a Black Jesus, Black people can now see God as someone who shares their features, allowing a direct, personal connection to the divine. This shift breaks the psychological chains of inferiority that were imposed by a whitewashed Christianity. A Black Jesus affirms that God understands their struggles, acknowledges their history, and sees them as fully deserving of dignity, love, and justice. Here, it should be understood that reclaiming Black Jesus goes beyond altering appearance. It represents a reclamation of a faith that stands in solidarity with the oppressed. The story of Jesus, as described in the Gospels, depicts a man born into poverty, living under Roman occupation, and ultimately executed for challenging injustice. This resonates deeply with the Black experience, from slavery and Jim Crow laws to modern-day racial inequality and police violence. Black theologians, such as Dr. James Cone, argue that a Black Jesus represents a powerful theological statement. Jesus becomes a symbol of resistance, echoing the struggles of Black people for justice and liberation. Black Jesus is no longer seen as a distant, disconnected figure. He becomes one who suffers with them and fights for their freedom. The image of a Black Jesus affirms the humanity of Black people in a world that dehumanizes them through slavery, colonialism, and segregation. For centuries, whiteness was associated with divinity, reinforcing the exploitation and dehumanization of non-white populations. Reclaiming a Black Jesus challenges this belief. It affirms that Black people are made in the image of God, and that their struggles, triumphs, and humanity are seen and valued by the divine. It restores a sense of dignity and worth, affirming that Black people are not just victims of history, but central to the story of faith, justice, and redemption. What do you believe? Was Jesus Black or white? Given the geography of the region where Jesus was born and the people around him, isn't it true that he was never a white man with blonde hair and blue eyes, like a European? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on the fact that Europeans created a monopoly on Christianity to exclude Black people from the salvation for which Jesus sacrificed. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.